Testing, testing.
Does that look like it says no battery? Is that on?
Hello, hello? No? Wireless.
It's wireless. Well, it was working before. We checked it.
Yeah, it was working, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Which one is it? Wireless.
wireless.
Just check, are we in stream audio or are we in...
This is stream here.
Hello, hello?
Testing. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our History Month presentation. It's really great to see so many people here, and it's be good to have that many every meeting. So we promoted this in the History Month magazine. So just as by way of interest, how many people are here tonight who saw the article in the History Month magazine and came here tonight? Look at them all. Lots of people. Well, special welcome to you. We have meetings like this every month on Thursday night here in this church for 9 months of the year on topics of interest to the Lutheran Church in many different ways. So I hope that you enjoy the evening and the presentation and the other activities we've got happening here tonight. Perhaps I could also mention, while I'm standing here, the special welcome to some of the guests that came here, particularly for the presentation tonight by Dr. Lockwood. Alan and Bev Schürmann come here from Melbourne. Welcome. And they're Greg's cousins. His brother Peter and wife Helen, his son and his wife Justine, and I see Dr. Andrew Piper is here too, who helped him with the book. So before we get on to that, I'll invite Rachel Cookle to speak to you. You may recall at our last meeting that I announced that she'd recently announced that she's going to resign as Director of the Lutheran Archives, and she's leaving next Tuesday, but she'd like to speak to our group tonight. So here's Rachel. What do you think of all the books on the dress?
So welcome everyone tonight. I'm Rachel Cookle, and as Jeff has said, I am the outgoing Director of Lutheran Archives, and I have 3 more working days left there. So I just wanted to say I wanted the chance to say farewell and thank you to the Friends of Lutheran Archives community. It has been a privilege, and I have been extremely blessed to have cared for the records of our church for the past 16 years. I worked for 5 years as the Assistant Archivist and then 11 years as Director. And in my role as Director, I have largely focused on preserving those records, the records of the people, the places, and the ministries of our church, with the express purpose that those records and stories can be accessed today and for generations to come. These are records that inform, entertain us, give and restore identity. And I'm extremely grateful to FoLA and the members of FoLA who tell, share and enjoy those stories through events such as tonight. And tonight, as you feast upon the harvest of preserves, and as you read your newsletter, the journal, and access the collection for research, and as you attend at events such as tonight, I know that my job in preserving the records to make them accessible has been a success. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. At our last committee meeting the other day, or last week, we as a committee decided to give Rachel life membership of Friends of Lutheran Archives. So we hope that you as general members agree with that decision. And so tonight I'd like to present her with a certificate of life membership from Friends of Lutheran Archives. Rachel has done an extraordinary job in all those years, and as I mentioned at one previous occasion, the archives have gone through difficult times with staffing and with funding and so forth, and Rachel has been very instrumental in gaining grants for various projects at the archives, and the projects have been innovative. There's a lot of thought gone into them, entrepreneurial, and I'm not sure exactly the figure, but it is close to $250,000. That's an amazing amount of grant money that she has been instrumental in gaining for work at the archives, and so we're extremely grateful for that, because it's money that we didn't have otherwise, and it's gone a long way. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Just a minute. I'm not sure where that photo's going to. So, in a moment I'll get Lois Sweck to give us a brief summary of the meeting next month, and then also to introduce our speaker. But I need to preempt it by saying that that screen is going to remain black. Unfortunately, unless they can find something, there seems to be one component missing up there, which we haven't got access to. So if they can get it going, we will.
Let people know where the toilets are.
Yeah, okay. Well, perhaps we'll give it a moment to get running. If people are here for the first time, not sure of the surroundings, if you need to go to the toilet, go out that door, and the toilet's around behind me here at the back of the building. Just meaning that we've got Joy. No comment. Okay, well, I'll ask Lois to come forward, Dr. Lois Sweck, to give a brief overview of our next meeting.
Oops. Sorry, what have I?
Nothing broken.
Nothing broken? Thank you. That's one good thing. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very wonderful to see you here. And yes, first of all, a little promotion for our next meeting, our June meeting, on the 26th of June here. We will be hearing from Philip Mann talking about a prominent Barossa entrepreneur of the very early years, a miller who began the first mills in the Barossa already in the very early 1840s and had a successful entrepreneurial career there in the Barossa, and had some very interesting stories about his family. And in fact, the story is connected with tonight's story of Clamor Schürmann, because Daniel Slinky married Bertha Teusler, whom Clamor Schürmann had very much hoped to marry. And that is one of the stories that is told in our in Clamor Schuermann's diaries, which we are going to be hearing from tonight. That will not be the main topic of tonight. Tonight we will be very privileged to hear Schürmann's words as he recorded his life, his work here in South Australia amongst the Indigenous people, among various Indigenous peoples of South Australia. For the 15 years he worked here in South Australia. These words will have been translated for us by the Reverend Dr. Greg Lockwood, and he will be telling many of those stories as Clamor Schuermann recorded them in his diaries. It's a great privilege for us to have the very first documents of the Lutheran story of South Australia. They are the very first boxes in our collection of church documents here in South Australia. And to just introduce you to Greg Lockwood, who has put in so much effort over the years to bring these stories to you. I must start with the fact that Greg, born 80 years ago, in Victoria, not in South Australia. Clamor Schuermann, after his 15 years here in South Australia, became pastor in the Western Districts of Victoria. And so the Schürmann family grew up there. And Greg is a great-great-grandson of that Schürmann family. But there are many aspects of Greg's life that echo those of his great-great-grandfather. And it was the call to be a pastor in the first place that brought him to South Australia from Victoria after his childhood in Natamuck and Horsham. He came to South Australia to study for the pastorate, to become a pastor here. He trained here, Emmanuel College and Seminary, and Luther Seminary, and Adelaide University. He majored at Adelaide University in languages, again, an echo of his great-great-grandfather. Greek, Latin, and German. He also has qualifications in education, as well as his pastoral training here, his training as a pastor. He was ordained in 1971 and then sent to work commissioned for work in Papua New Guinea, in a mission field of the church. 1971, he began there, married Chris. Their first two children were born in New Guinea. From 1971 till 1987, he worked in 3 educational institutions in Papua New Guinea, 2 teacher training colleges for the local people to go and teach in the local schools, and the seminary. So Barlo, Kipik, and Oglebang were the places he worked. During that time, he also spent time in the United States, in St. Louis, obtaining a doctorate in theology, specializing in New Testament studies and missiology. Missiology being the study of missions, the purpose and practice of missions. So, years then in New Guinea were followed by a pastorate here in Bridgewater, and then back to the United States for a decade as a teacher, again in a training institution, a theological seminary in Fort Wayne this time, Concordia Seminary in Fort Wayne. A decade there, then back again to a pastorate in Victoria this time, in Bendigo, and then final years, 5 years here at what was at the beginning Luther Seminary, at the end we now know as the Australian Lutheran College. So his years here as lecturer at Australian Lutheran College ended with retirement in 2010, and then he took up his real work. That is, being a volunteer at Lutheran Archives. Well, no, not quite. Greg is still very active in the church, in ministry in the church, in preaching and teaching. But we, of course, down at Lutheran Archives, think that, of course, this has been, and the general community of South Australia will be grateful for the work that he has done as a volunteer with us. Soon after his retirement, he learnt to read the old German handwriting. If you've seen it, if we manage to get anything on screen, you will be able to see it. You can also imagine this is an old handwriting, not read by a small number of people, let us say. And you can also, if you've ever read any old letters and so on in handwriting, even in English, you can imagine that there are particular difficulties when you are reading someone's diary, a diary that is written by a person for their own use. They're free to use their own little shortcuts, their own abbreviations, their own idiosyncratic ways of expressing things. And so it takes quite a deal of effort to become familiar with those ways and with that writing, and then produce not only a complete German text, but then also a complete English text. And that is what Greg Lockwood has done for us and will present to us tonight. A small selection with a particular focus, as the title says, on talking together, on missionary Clement Schürmann's interaction with the Indigenous peoples among whom he worked. So please welcome Greg Lockwood, who will be passing on to us those stories recorded by his great-great-grandfather.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome here this evening. And thank you, Lois. Lois has become a very good friend through the last 10 years. It must be 10 years. And good evening, everyone here at Emmanuel this evening, and those tuning in online. If anyone else deserved to see their name on the front cover of the diary after C.W. Schürmann and me, that would be you, Lois, as chief consultant. Now, the diary, perhaps I should explain that now. We've had a number of dramas, and the last drama began this evening. We were having our tea, and I got a phone call from Michael Bollen at Wakefield Press, apologising that he could not be here tonight. He has a heavy cold. But he said, we have got 6 copies for you to pick up. Now, of those 6 copies, my cousins, Alan and Bev, will be taking 3 of them to Port Lincoln when they head that way and give to various people who've been helpful over there with the Port Lincoln part of the story. Yes. You will have noticed there are sheets there, because there are only 6 copies here tonight. There are sheets where you can find out and order a copy through Wakefield Press. Postage free, yes, yes. I think that's a privilege for people who are here tonight. Is that how it usually works? Yeah. So, this is a special History Month event. A parallel to what's happened with Wakefield Press at this time. They were under a lot of pressure to get this done in time. My little laptop failed some time ago, some weeks ago. The letter T simply would not work. And it took a while through the young expert in Mount Barker to get it to Adelaide Airport, to the Australia Post people at Adelaide Airport. From there, it went to Melbourne, the distribution department of Australia Post in Melbourne, and then back again to Adelaide. Meanwhile, he's keeping me posted every few days, and I'm checking with him every few days. And it's been a very similar story on a much grander scale with these books. But I'm very thankful that we at least have a down payment of the first 6. I'd like to thank very much Michael Bolin, who's been really great to work with at Wakefield Press, and his typesetter, Jesse Pollard. This is the Schürmann's own writing of the front cover. You can see from that picture, Schürmann set out with great plans. Quite an ornate one. It's held at the archives. The original is held at the archives, and it's all tied together, and you can see the fascicles and the process of them being tied together there. We move on, excuse me, we move on now to the Schürmann farm from which Clement Schürmann, where he grew up. He lost his father before the age of 1. He lost his mother before he turned 11. And he was, as the youngest son, he was eligible to inherit that farm. Or this is a typical farm. No, this is the Ellerbeck farm, yes. But that's a 19th century picture of it. So that's what he was able to inherit until he decided to become a pastor and follow his older brother into the ministry. Clement Schürmann, as Lois has explained, he was 15, how many years in South Australia? About 15 with the Aborigines, and then he was called across to Victoria and became a parish pastor over there and president of the Eastern District of the former ELSA, Evangelical Lutheran Synod of Australia, and which then became the ELCA, former ELCA. 2 of his sons settled in Natimuc, my hometown. Rudolph was the eldest, and Rudolph was my maternal great-great-grandfather, and my great-uncle Carl. They both settled there and worked together, and we can come to that now, in the general store, Schürmann's general store. And could we have a photo now? Oh, I should explain, perhaps. I could do that now. Yeah, thanks, James. Schürmann's general store was on the Horsham side, the eastern side of the creek that runs through the town. My grandfather, Alfred Lockwood's newspaper business was on the other side of that creek, on the Adelaide side of that creek. Yes. Teresaville, the home, beautiful home. Those were the only 2 I knew of the Schürmann family. My aunties Emma and Hilda, Carl's children, lived there. It's called Teresaville after his wife, Teresa Nichterlein. Yes. Carl was married to Teresa. Rudolph married Sophie Sudals, the daughter of J.W.A. Sudals of Adelaide. Growing up in Natimuc, I often heard my parents referring to Frank Schürmann and other Schürmanns. I think Frank's your dad, Alan, yes, your father, yes, often referring to the Schürmanns, but the only two I knew were I called them my aunties, Auntie Hilda and Auntie Emma. Lovely couple. Our focus tonight will be Schürmann's talking together with Aboriginal people, both in the Adelaide Plains and later Port Lincoln. Christian Teichelmann and Clement Schürmann arrived in Adelaide mid-October 1838, about 3 weeks before Pastor Carville and his people. So, James, could we have those now? Yes. Schürmann there, unfortunately, the only photo we have of him, 1890. Teichelmann, Christian Teichelmann, those were the two who arrived in 1838. And then the next two arrived 2 years later, Samuel Closey and Edward Meyer. It was a great relief to the two who'd come here at first, that the other two followed then. A great support. We come next to the contents page. I'm sorry you can't read that, but there, Clara who's here this evening, Clara has contributed you can almost read that there, the record of the Barngarla and Noo toponyms. That's from Clara. And Robert Amory, the glossary, so that's the Port Lincoln language that Clara specialised in. And just ahead of that is from a contribution from Robert Amory of Adelaide University on the Kaurna language. Now we come to Cudlip Pinner. Cudlip Pinner was one of the first Aborigines that Schürmann and Teichelmann met here in Adelaide. The Brits would give them all nicknames, not entirely complimentary necessarily, but he was known as Captain Jack, and the other one was Mullawira Burka, and they called him King John. Yes, Schürmann records, and most of my talk this evening will be lengthy excerpts from Schürmann's conversation with Aborigines. First contact on the 14th of October 1838. Not far from the church. He compliments the British for having built such a beautiful church. I'm not sure whether it was the Anglican one or what it was. Not far from the church, we saw for the first time a group of 3 Aborigines, a man with 2 wives, and then a foursome, a man with 2 wives and a child. I spoke to both groups and found that the men were less inclined than the women to let themselves be spoken to. One finds among them as much vivacity, teachability and alertness as you could ever wish for. If you meet up with a group, their immediate question is, your name? If you answer them, they all begin, one after another, to make their comments, which are always accompanied with jokes and laughter. A few days ago, I asked a man where his wife was. After he pointed her out to me, I asked him with finger signs whether he had more than one, whereupon he showed me 2 fingers. I shook my head and held up 1 finger. At this, the man laughed heartily and gave me to understand that others had 3 or even 4. We come now to, and I'll just get a bit of a sip. We come now, thanks James, to this one. Doesn't want to open. I'll let you open it properly. It's one of these. Thanks, dear. For some reason, the top comes in 2 parts these days. It's a lovely gift from a granddaughter, so I'm really quite modern. Yes, native terms. We're getting into the next year now, 1839. On the 20th of February 1839, the Aborigine Wariato died, one of the two wives of her husband Manitja. She was one of the biggest and strongest among her fellow countrywomen, in the full bloom of life and about 25 to 30 years old. The cause of her sickness and death was of a kind one would not have expected among the Aborigines, namely a miscarriage. Schürmann goes on to describe her, quote, last day, without rational consciousness. For example, she called to her mother as loudly as she could, although her mother was standing quite close to her. End of quote. His description of her passing and the ensuing burial rites takes up 2.5 pages of the diary, too much to read this evening. He includes a report of the soothsaying that took place, the calling out, the quote, the calling out into the grave in a weak, ghostly voice, end of quote, in order to determine who was responsible for her death. I recall witnessing such a scene in Papua New Guinea too. We find a shorter report 5 months later when Schürmann and Protector Morehouse make their first trip to Encounter Bay. On their way home from Hindmarsh Island, or the Lake Alexandrina area, we noticed a corpse that was sitting upright in one of the huts, with crossed legs and arms stretched out. It was quite dry, and where it was not yet completely dry, the fire burning under him in the hut was designed to soon dry him out thoroughly. His whole body was smeared with red ochre, but his chest and stomach were daubed with white markings. His beard was burned off right up to the moustache, and a bone about 1 foot long was stuck in the septum of his nose. So he sat there, not unlike an idol or an Egyptian mummy. However, with this custom, the Aborigines probably only intend to preserve the memory of the departed for a longer period. For when they saw that we were commenting on the extraordinary figure and drawing each other's attention to it, they said in an imploring tone, sit down, sit down. Governor Gawler, the police, and Aboriginal leaders like Mulawira Burka and Cudlet Pinner exercised firm civic control over both settlers and Aborigines. However, tensions sometimes flared up. For example, on the 4th of July in 1839, about 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, 2 Aborigines had a violent quarrel which soon became more general. As a result, bright firebrands were soon flying like dragons through the pitch-dark air from one hut into another. The cause of this squabble was that one of them had not shared any meat from his prey, as the Aborigines usually do. End of that quote. And on the 30th of January 1840, Schürmann reports, last night there was so much noise among the Aborigines camped near my house that I awoke and got up. I found that Walwet Pinner, otherwise a quiet man, was beside himself with anger with his young wife and her bedfellows. He had given her on loan, but she had been used way beyond what he had approved or indeed expected. Not only had he wanted to spear his wife, but he'd actually thrown a spear at the Wiramayuna people who had committed the shameful act. Initially, the Wiramayuna had fled, but in the morning they returned defiantly. At least there was no fight. Judging from this incident, the wives seemed to be actively involved in this kind of lending out and are sent by their men as procurers. And I believe that happens in some Spanish cultures too. Schürmann goes on to pray for better days. He would experience far, far worse, especially in settler Aboriginal relations, after he was reassigned to the comparatively lawless Port Lincoln. Now we come to his satisfaction in conveying the main features of Christianity to 2 Aborigines on the 6th of June 1839. I said that Moonlight Yellow, whom the foreigners call Jehovah, made the sun, moon and stars, the earth, and 2 people, Adam and Eve, that they had borne children and their daughters had given birth again, and so on until finally there were very many people. But Eve had eaten from the forbidden food, so that Munat Yellow became very angry and condemned them to death. But he had great compassion and therefore had let his child become human through a young woman. Jesus had been circumcised like the black men and was a good man in his thoughts, words and deeds. He had been hanged by his countrymen. I think it's a very good, very, very sharp use of terminology there, because some Aborigines were being hanged here in South Australia at that time, of course, and some Aborigines as well were being hanged. So Jesus had been hanged by his countrymen, and then on the third day had gone up to heaven. Fortunately, in this inadequate presentation, I could use the biblical terms that on earth Jesus had no father, and in heaven he had no mother. In reply to the question whether I had seen all of this above or in heaven, I said Jesus had taken 12 young men who had told it to strangers far and wide, and then had put on paper what the people with the long clothes, like me, I like that, people with the long clothes, like me, Teichelman, Howard and Carville, are now telling their hearers. I first said this in reply to a question whether preacher Howard has seen all this above. Their joy over this message, which showed that they had understood me, they expressed through words and facial expressions, and indeed through spontaneous loud laughter. My suggestion that we soon build a Munat Yellow house where, like the white people on Sunday, we would sing and I and Teichelman would speak, found the most joyful approval. Of course, the missionary's message often met a mixed reception, indifference in some cases, and even ridicule. I'm not afraid of that big fire pot below. I'm pretty strong. I'm not afraid of God, and so on. There's a most enjoyable section, 5 days with the Aborigines in the bush, 9 to 13 September 1839. Both Schürmann and Teichelman were invited to join in this hunt. Just a short excerpt this evening as Schürmann reflects on the 5 days. At the first capture, I had already asked about a tale. I wanted to present it to Bertha. Bertha's his good friend in Clemzig village, the teenage friend that he set his heart on. I wanted to present it to Bertha as a sign of how close she had been to me, even in the bush. But they always put me off till the next time. Now, from this third kangaroo, I thought I would surely get the tail, and most of them claimed it for me, but an old skinflint was unwilling. Now I acted very offended and reproached them for not keeping their word. And when they again referred me to tomorrow, I said, tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, you will still be saying tomorrow. And so tomorrow would never come. That made them laugh. Meanwhile, my brother Twitpuro, who always spoke up for me, said that if I did not get a tail tomorrow, he would get angry. I don't believe he ever did get one. Schürmann winds up his report. What I promised myself from this trip in terms of a closer acquaintance with the way of life and the language of the Aborigines, I found more than confirmed. Making progress in the language lies not so much in the number of new words, but rather in a greater appropriation and a more fluent use of the words you already know. Furthermore, I was delighted with the propriety and good manners among the entirely free and equal Aborigines, and especially with the willingness of the young to follow the older men. I think it's a very good insight into Aboriginal culture. The Aboriginal people like to be entirely free and equal with us and with each other. Now we come to his courtship of Bertha. and he's buying engagement rings with Bertha on the 2nd November 1839. Schürmann's courting of Bertha Fiedler in Klemzig is a major theme in the narrative for 10 months, from the 13th of August 1839 to the 23rd of May 1840. If you enjoy love stories, let me refer you to the diary and to Helen Schubert's article, Love and Intrigue in Klemzig, in the December 2014 issue of FoLA Journal. Schürmann's wooing of Bertha is like a Shakespearean drama in 5 acts. But as that episode in the life of a lonely bachelor is a sideshow to our theme this evening, Schürmann's talking together with the Aborigines, I'll confine myself to just one scene. On the 2nd of November 1839, Schürmann writes, "As I knew that Bertha was coming to Adelaide today, I attended to some business in town around that time." And he goes on to mention how he visits the police station to make inquiries about the cottage he hopes will be built for him, and Bertha at Encounter Bay. Then he inquires about a horsehair broom that he's ordered. He goes on, quote, "As it turned out, I wanted to go in the direction of Roland's neighbourhood in the hope of meeting Bertha there somewhere. But what do you know? My sweetheart met me already at Hacks. Together we went to Waterloo House to buy rings, but he had none. He directed us to Wainwright, who had an ample supply. Bertha acted very coy, but still she let herself be persuaded to try on her ring. Hers cost £1. For me, he wanted to recommend an ornate one for £2. However, Bertha was of the opinion they must be the same, and so I also took one for £1. After she had finished some more business, she put her basket on the wagon and walked ahead with me across the bridge. Here I led her to the Aborigines, who asked me if she was my wife. One woman asked me if my soul was on fire. After I had received a sweet kiss from Bertha, I escorted her again on the way, where some Klemzig women, and soon afterwards the wagon met us, and so we had to part." The next day, 3rd of November 1839, Teichelmann and Schürmann are encouraging the Aboriginal boys to wash themselves. Here they were forerunners of what has been accomplished on a far wider scale by the Fred Hollows Foundation. Quote, "For a long time we'd been concerned to encourage the Aborigines to wash themselves, which is something they never do. It is to this lack of hygiene that I ascribe the almost universal eye diseases among them. Today we succeeded with a number of boys in this way. We happened to be drinking tea when they came into our hut and as usual begged for some tea. I said they could have some on the condition that they first washed their face and hands. This inducement immediately accomplished what all our entreaties had been unable to do. From their awkwardness, it became evident that they were washing for the first time in their lives. Brother Teichelmann then began to comb the hair of one of them. This impressed them so much that they all wanted to be combed. One even asked me if I could cut off his locks, which were caked with ochre, so that he could also be combed." We come now to conducting school at Piltawwadley. It's on the cover of the book too, that scene. The Aboriginal School and Chapel. This is happening now on the 23rd of December 1839, just before Christmas. As arranged, I conducted school today with the Aboriginal children for the first time. There were 7 of them, together with some grown-ups. Among the grown-ups was Itcha Pinner, who had grasped the letters so quickly that he could already provide me with little help. Next day, Christmas Eve, Schürmann records, "Today, instead of 7, I had 15 children in the school. Until now, the children have learned quickly through play and therefore give me joy." Then on our Boxing Day, the 26th of December, "The number of my pupils rose today to about 18, apart from a few adults." And could we see Possum Place now? That's a photo of the possum there by the Torrens. Of course, the mission school at Pilter-Wadley, Possum Place by the Torrens, has its ups and downs through the years when Schuermann and later Samuel Closey were the teachers. On the 7th of March, going on to a different topic now, on the 7th of March 1840, Schuermann records, quote, "The dreadful discovery that Mulla Wirraburka's youngest wife, Kaurna, had given birth to a child on the 21st of February while I was in Harndorf and had once murdered it. I immediately went to the Aborigines and held before them the sinfulness of such a murder, but some laughed and others were angry. Others, like Cudlet Pinner, said it was an old custom with them to kill newborn children if they were small and weak, and denied the evil of such a practice. Cudlet Pinner was so stiff-necked that when I remonstrated that Jehovah would throw such murderers into hell, he even said that didn't matter, God could roast him in hell forever. Most mothers openly and with the most unnatural shamelessness and audacity admit they have killed one or more of their children. When I ask why, they answer confidently, quote, because the previous child was still young and so they would grow better, end of quote. Some, however, seek to deny it and allege that the child had been already dead or decomposing or it had died in childbirth. We come now to the title page of the grammar, outlines of a grammar that Teichelmann and Schürmann had published here in Adelaide in 1840, with a lot of encouragement from Governor Gawler, who took, I think he took 50 copies for himself. Schürmann's Adelaide diary ends abruptly with his entry for the 1st of June 1840. 3 months later, at Governor Gawler's behest, he leaves Adelaide and takes up a new appointment as Sub-Protector of Aborigines on Eyre Peninsula, based in Port Lincoln. Instead of the nicely bound Adelaide diary, he just uses an exercise book from here on. Also, in contrast with the Adelaide diary, his Port Lincoln record is more fragmentary, with extensive breaks. It's 128 pages handwritten compared with 282 pages handwritten of the Adelaide diary. Yes, extensive breaks. It concludes after New Year's Day 1845, or more precisely with the terse entry for the 2nd of January. The Aborigines all left the town. Whereas in Adelaide, Schürmann had no trouble finding Aborigines to talk to, his experience in Port Lincoln was entirely different. He had to go looking for them. A view across Port Lincoln now. Lovely harbour there. Having arrived in the new settlement on 16 September 1840, Schürmann's first meeting with 9 adult men took place 3 weeks later, on 8th October. So he had to wait 3 weeks before he saw any of them. He describes the encounter. At 6 p.m, young Smith came to me with the news that 9 Aborigines had arrived at the settlement. Shortly afterward, one of the police clerks came with a similar report, and I went at once to see them. They were all adult men camped under a tent in front of Jones's house. It was already dark, so I couldn't see them well. By the light of the fire, I observed that some of them were fairly old. They were circumcised. They wore, it was sub-incision over there, different from Adelaide. They wore long beards with the ends plaited together and wrapped with grey fur, and none of them wore a shred of clothing. I spoke to them in the Adelaide language, but could not make myself understood. One of them, Bobby, spoke a few scraps of English and asked me my name, and nearly all of them told me their ancestral names. I detected the following words among them, which are also used by the Aborigines in Adelaide: Yure, ear; Mena, eye; Medla, nose; Metja, name; Ngai, or Ngaitjo, mine. Ngai is eye, Ngaitjo, mine, and winner, go away. The word kaitja seems to me to indicate a child, a tukutja, because one of them asked me if Gottfried was my son and used this word. Gottfried Kappler was a young lad from Clemzig who was assisting Schürmann in Port Lincoln. If that is the case, then the man assumed that Gottfried had the status of a son. I invited the most talkative one to come home with me, and he indicated that he was tired and would come in the morning. At the same time, he made it clear he wanted me to go away, that Adelaide word, winnie, so he could sleep. His wish also seemed to apply to the rest of those who were present, for beside the police, there were several others there. After a good half hour, I returned home again, glad of the opportunity that was now presenting itself to me to make a connection with the Aborigines. Sadly, Schürmann has to report next day that these 9 men were treated shamefully. They were covered in blood from their wounds and had been were imprisoned. He also wrote a statement to Protector Morehouse with the request that he tell the governor, quote, "I could hardly remain here if the government did not rectify the injustice or support my contact with the Aborigines." Dr. Benjamin Harvey intervened. He opened the dungeon, shared out a basket full of ship's biscuit among the Aborigines, and let them go. Later, Harvey and Schürmann would testify in the ensuing court case. This episode occurred 2 to 3 days after news reached the settlement that 12-year-old Frank Horson had been speared by Aborigines. And now we'll see the Horson, yes, the Horson monument, 12-year-old lad. Schürmann, in response to the murder of young Frank Horson, there was a punitive expedition which Schürmann was invited to join, or asked to join, as interpreter, etc. His remaining time on Eyre Peninsula is punctuated with one report after another of attacks on settlers, followed by reprisals. Relations between Aborigines and Europeans deteriorated to the extent that the Eyre Peninsula authorities called for assistance from Adelaide. Before relations worsened, in his first weeks in Port Lincoln, Schürmann joined excursions on Dr. Harvey's cutter, exploring the waters and offshore islands, Tumby Bay, Cape Bolingbroke, Louth Bay, and so on. And this was interspersed with treks into the bush, Vai to hunt kangaroos and Cape Barren geese, I to meet Aborigines. The Cape Barren geese, we have our goose, yes, and there are quite a few of them in the Clearland Wildlife Reserve in the Adelaide Hills, and would have been very good eating. One of the most notable expeditions in the cutter occurred in December 1840. Schürmann writes, "In the evening of the 3rd of December, Dr. Harvey, W. Smith and I went on board the cutter Emu on a journey to the head of Spencer's Gulf." There's a map at this point, but you won't be able to make too much sense of it, but some of the significant places on the eastern coast of the peninsula. They planned to ascertain from the Aborigines what they knew about Mr. Charles Dutton, who had set out from Port Lincoln in the Adelaide direction and not been heard of since. Schürmann was also interested in a scoping study of how many Aborigines lived along the eastern coast of Eyre Peninsula. The voyage was not without its dramas. most notably on the 11th of December, where Schuermann records, "This day will remain memorable for me as long as I live. Never do I remember suffering so much from thirst as on this hot and oppressive day. After we had brought our ship about a mile further under the lee of a small hill, each of us filled a bottle with water and prepared for a hike around the furthest point of the Gulf. It might have been about 9 a.m. when we broke camp, but at this early hour of the day it was already unbearably hot. The notorious north wind was blowing with all, this is 11 December, was blowing with all its scorching and baking severity, and the low, sparse, scrubby bush was glowing like a furnace. We'd hardly walked for 5 minutes when one of our number proposed we have a rest, to which all willingly agreed. Already our thirst made each of us think of his water bottle. The head of the Gulf was not as far as we'd thought, and the hope of reaching the end revived our spirits. When you'd reached our goal and rested for a few minutes in the thin shade of the stunted bushes, we set out on the return journey, little encouraged and cheered by the infertile appearance of the land. After we'd come back about a third of our way, my companions suggested a rest. But I and the Aborigine, having long since drunk our water and tormented by thirst, preferred to hurry on. However, thirst and the resulting weakness were soon mounting to such a high degree that we had to lie down every 5 minutes. And it was only the fear that the debility might increase and we might never reach the ship that drove me forwards. I tried the leaves of the casuarina, for they were as dry as straw. Then I had recourse to the leaves of the native fig, and even though they were warm and tasted terrible, they did provide me with a little relief. The Aborigine was nearly as weak and distressed as I was, but nevertheless he took me by the hand several times and cheered me up with the hope that the ship was no longer far away. It would be in vain to try to describe my joy when I caught sight of the ship. And I'm reminded of how many times in Papua New Guinea we had to rely on New Guineans to help us, in my case, to navigate the Markham River, which is very turbulent, not far from the city of Lae. And a New Guinean man just really grabbed me by the arm and made sure I got through safely. And yes, you can't do mission work without the support of the local people, the people you were trying to reach. The following year, 1842, saw an outbreak of trouble on our peninsula. Deprived of their traditional prey, the kangaroos, and tempted to find their protein instead from the thousands of sheep introduced by the settlers, hostilities became inevitable. The month of March began and ended unhappily. On the 3rd of March, Schürmann reports, "On this day, Mr. Brown, together with his hut keeper, was killed by the Aborigines. The news of this sad event was brought to the town the following morning, the 4th of March, by Brown's and White's shepherds. At once a jury was assembled, to which I also belonged, in order to hear the shepherd's testimony." According to Ivan Rudolph, the biographer of Edward John Eyre, quote, "The murder of the gentlemanly John Brown was especially sad. Brown had been reading a book in a wooded valley when a group of Aborigines crept up on him. An Aboriginal witnessed that Brown had knelt to pray before he was murdered." Then towards the end of that same month, 29 March 1842, Mr. Rolls Biddle, a Quaker and Schürmann's good friend, was murdered, together with James Fastings, Biddle's shepherd, and Mrs. Stubbs. Schuermann writes Tubbs. It should have been Stubbs. Mrs. Stubbs, the wife of Charlie Stubbs, the hut keeper. Old Mother Stubbs was killed, even though for a long time she begged for her life, calling out, "Oh Jamie, to an Aborigine who was well known to them and whom they had often fed. Once the news reached the town, a punitive expedition set out on the 2nd of April with Schürmann as the interpreter. He records, "The party left about 8 next morning. It consisted of 8 persons on horseback and 6 Aborigines, Munta, Illa, Tunba, Yumba, Tubu and Yuta. After 3 to 4 miles, they came to a campsite, and the whole camp broke up and fled in different directions. On Driver's command, Charles Driver was Port Lincoln's 3rd resident magistrate. Steward shot down the man standing closest to us. Driver was shouting repeatedly, "Knock him over." When he was shot, this man had no weapon in his hand. I asked Driver why he gave the order to fire if the people could be taken captive. To this he responded that he wanted no prisoners. One could do nothing with them. Driver asked for reinforcements from Adelaide. As a result, on the 17th of April, the vessel Victoria arrived with Lieutenant Huguenin and 16 men of the British Army's 96th Regiment of Foot. So mounted troops now pursued the murderers. On the 25th of April, they head for Coffin Bay, where they find a group of Aborigines. To his credit, the lieutenant, quote, saw that the Aborigines were not showing any hostility and called out, "That will do. No, no." With all my strength, I called out myself not to shoot. At first, there were 3 Aborigines, together with 2 women and some children. But immediately afterward, a 4th by the name of Norma came. A soldier had shot a bullet through his lower body so that his intestines came out on both sides. This man was about 10 to 20 paces away from the other Aborigines, was in the water preoccupied with spearing fish. How great was my astonishment when Norma came to me with a wild look, a terrible wound, and declaring that he was a friend of mine and no murderer. I, coupler, I very good. Norma had adopted the name of Schürmann's assistant, his young assistant, Gottfried Coupler. When Norma or Coupler heard that they wanted to bring him back to Port Lincoln, his moving words were, "I bumba," that is, "I want to stay here." When we left, he asked for my handkerchief and covered his face with it. I had known this man for more than a year. He was always very hearty and open. So it was like a knife through my soul to see this innocent man shot, and I could not hold back my tears. End of quote. For Schürmann, this incident seems to have been the last straw, leading him to relinquish his role as sub-protector from the end of 1842. Schürmann writes elsewhere that he and others in the settlement had no difficulty distinguishing between the innocent, open-hearted Aborigines and the guilty ones. Thus, in their May 1841 census of Eyre Peninsula Aborigines, Dr. Harvey and Schürmann designated 2 of the Aboriginal men as Malbu, as murderers. And you can see that in the census report that's in the book. Yes, there it is. I'm sorry you won't be able to read very much there. We can read an interesting parallel to the Eyre Peninsula Wars or skirmishes or whatever you call them. They weren't very nice. You can read an interesting parallel in a book I picked up at Lutheran Archives. It was being sold for $15. I had owned a copy earlier, but dear Ben Hollister let me have it for nothing. So I reread the whole thing. Entitled Miclusho Maclay, New Guinea Diaries, 1871 to 1883. Published by Kristen Press in Madang, Papua New Guinea, 1975, translated from the Russian. Nikolai Nikolaevich Miclusho Maclay was a Russian explorer who made 3 long visits, long stays really, to the Rai coast of Papua New Guinea near Madang, 1871 to 72, then 1876, 77, and 1883. And he really befriended the people, got to know them well. After the murder of some Polynesian missionaries at Carlo, one of the mission stations Maclay had visited with the London Mission Society missionary charmers, There was a punitive expedition from Sydney to maintain British prestige. Quote, "The usual procedure in such cases was to assume the collective guilt of the whole community and destroy the village. In the event of the almost inevitable resistance, firearms were used with the loss of life of innocent people. Macleay was a friend of the commander in charge, Commodore Wilson, and persuaded him that such methods were unjust and productive of nothing but further evil, and persuaded him that there were better methods. Wilson was impressed by his arguments and invited him to accompany the ship Wolverine. At Port Moresby, Macleay's standpoint was strongly supported by Reverend Chalmers, and as a result, the natives directly responsible for the crime were identified, and in the attempt to apprehend them, the principal guilty Polynesian was killed. In the Port Lincoln case, the principal murderer, Ngabi, Little Jamie, was sentenced to death by hanging and imprisoned in Adelaide. Schürmann visited him a number of times and tried to comfort him with the Christian gospel. After the 10th of May and that eventful year 1842, there's a 2.5-year gap in the diary. There followed just 5 pages for 1844. Yes, and there are 2 publications by Schürmann in 1844, The Aboriginal Tribes of Port Lincoln in South Australia, Their Mode of Life, Manners, Customs, etc., published in Adelaide, 1844, and then also his Vocabulary and Grammar of the Port Lincoln language, which is called Parnkalla by Schürmann and Barngarla these days. And the diary peters out with a New Year's Day prayer. A new year has begun. This is 1845, New Year's Day. A new year has begun. Grant me grace, O dear Lord and God, to spend it in your fear for my salvation, and at least to see some blessing for those entrusted to me. Guard me from sin, awaken me to new spiritual life, and strengthen me to walk before these rough-hewn Aborigines with foresight, patience, love, and Christian earnestness. And then, as I mentioned already, January the 2nd, there's just this short entry, the Aborigines all left the town. Now, for an overview of Schürmann's ministry later on, we can read the diary's epilogue, much of it supplied by Betty Hoof in Hamilton. Those years included 4 very happy ones at his school at Wallala near North Shields, north of Port Lincoln. There, from 1849 through 1852, he taught 24 Aboriginal children. It seems he had rations for 24 children. No longer was he lonely. His wife, by the way, who was visited there during that time by Carl Wilhelmi, a German botanist who was associated with Baron von Müller in Melbourne, who was responsible for the Melbourne Botanic Gardens and Castlemaine Gardens. No longer during these 4 very happy years was Schürmann lonely. His wife Minna, nee Mushmet, sister of the pastor Mushmet, who was at St Stephen's in its early days, his wife Minna, and their firstborn son Rudolph were with him, no longer lonely. So we'll just wind up. Here's Minna. She is buried in South Hamilton near her husband. And then going on, this is excellent. We're very grateful to Pastor Rob Schubert and Mark Teal, who took us to the site. And this is rather a good shot, I think, of Schuermann School at Wallala, north of Port Lincoln. The Aboriginal parents up on the hill could keep a good eye on what was happening in the school. It's not a case that there was stolen generation or any of that. They were able to be very close to all that was happening. So that's the site. And we end up with a photo of a Noa girl. Schürmann never learned that language, but it's from the Coffin Bay area, Tatala Noa tribe. These are the sort of people that he would have been befriending and reaching out to and talking to. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, are there any questions? Now, you'll just wait until I get to each person so we can record it on the YouTube, live stream. Thanks, Margaret.
Greg, what happened to Bertha? Oh, she married the wrong...
Next week, next month, next FoLA meeting. Poor old Bertha died. I think she was only 30 when she died. And she complained of ill health a number of times when Schürmann was courting her. That she married Daniel Schlinke and 7 children in that time. 30. That would wear you out.
Well, Philip can talk. He's one of 11 children. Now, any other questions? Thank you, Morris.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation tonight. Several months ago, I read a book on Germans in South Australia. He was not a German, but he had a lot to do with all this. And he apparently knew Schürmann very well in Adelaide. And when he was told that Mr. Schürmann, or Pastor Schürmann, was going to go to Port Lincoln, he was very concerned. And in the book, I just saw one little comment that there was a major killing of Aboriginals west of Port Lincoln, and this person was concerned. Have you got any comment on it?
Yes, Morris, thanks for your question. I don't know that much about it, but there was the Elliston massacre, wasn't there, west of Port Lincoln? And that was a notorious incident, and there are monuments to that over at Elliston. But beyond that, I don't know that much about it.
Okay, any other questions? Yes?
Thank you so much for your full translation. As researchers have been waiting for this for so long, thank you for all your work. I'm wondering if, because William Light was instructed to conciliate the natives and to consider the animals to be their property, I'm wondering if you've seen any mention of William Light in the journals, because he didn't die until the 6th of October, 1839.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes, there are a number of references to William Wyatt. When Teichelman and Schürmann first arrived in Adelaide, he was the protector of Aborigines, and they got on well together. They were in his home, etc. And then Morehouse, Matthew Morehouse, came along, and that was not always. I think the relationship with Wyatt was better than with Morehouse. They go to Encounter Bay together, for example, and Morehouse is preoccupied with all sorts of things. And then there's a 1860, wasn't it, some commission and Morehouse testified at that, but never even mentioned the German missionaries who'd preceded. Is that right, Lois? Christine, you know that, 1860? Yeah.
Okay, any other questions quickly? I'll get to you in a moment.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. Just the last picture was of the native girl holding an animal. Was that a fox or a dingo? Do we know? No. We do. Sorry, Philip, what was that? It's a dingo that looks like a fox, yeah. Okay. And I think Kelly was asking about Colonel Light. Is that correct, Kelly? Oh, was it William Wyatt?
Yeah. No, I don't. No, I don't. Am I still owing someone a reply? Yeah.
Repeat the comment. Yeah, somebody over here.
Just going to ask, did Schürmann keep the same sort of diaries when he went over to Victoria at all?
You'd have to ask Betty Hoof. Christine, we believe not. Many people, Schürmann had an obligation, a commitment with the Dresden Mission Society. Director Vermelskirch asked them in his instructions to them, his parting instructions to them, he asked them to keep a diary. And I think quarterly, they'd make quarterly reports and so forth. So it all had to, yeah, they were obligated to, they felt so. But you know, diary keeping is, I think C.S. Lewis said, it's a great waste of time. But if you're obligated to do it, yeah.
Okay, one more question perhaps.
I'd like to add my thanks to you, Greg, for this breakthrough that you've translated this very significant historical document for us and for future generations to use. It's a very important resource. Thank you. You mentioned at the start about the churches that were around Adelaide. Was Schürmann involved in the building of any churches around Adelaide, Port Lincoln or elsewhere? Thanks.
Not for quite a while, Ian. Not for quite a while. What was his name here? What was the pastor who was very generous and let the 5 or so, a handful of the German missionaries here use his chapel, Stowe's chapel. He was very generous to them. And they got on well together.
Okay. Look, thank you for all those questions, and certainly you're most welcome to fire some more questions to our guest speaker over supper time. So I'll ask Julie Krause to move a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. It is my great privilege on behalf of other and those who are here tonight who are also in the family tree of Schürmann. I'm his great-great-great-granddaughter, coming from his 6th son, Bernhard, and I still remember my great-grandmother, Bertha Schürmann, who became Bertha Habel. So I've got a great connection to the next part of his story in the Western District, because that's where I grew up, and have worshipped in a number of churches that he helped to establish there in Western Victoria. Also, thanking you for your incredible dedication and work to double translating the diaries of Schürmann. As said, providing us with a wonderful piece of historical manuscripts and something to leave for future generations. And I think for myself too, it's been really amazing that unbeknownst to me, like as a young, typical late teenager, 20-year-old, you don't really care too much about all your old rallies. But my first teaching job was actually at Andaria or Hermannsburg, and it was during the years of the outstation movement. So I guess again, a time I had to camp out with Aboriginal people, got a skin name, families, attended ceremonies too. So I sort of feel quite proud of my ancestor and all that he did in his early days. And I think it really comes through with a lot of mission work, which yourself have been involved in, where it's seeing people, no matter who they are and how different they are, that they're all made in the image of God. And I think that comes through Clummer's work and your work. So again, just on behalf of all gathered here tonight, I want to thank you immensely for all the time, blood, sweat, tears, poor eyesight probably, through all that translation and presenting us with a wonderful work. So thank you, and thank you.
So thank you. That sort of draws us closer to the end of our evening. I'll just mention this book again. You might want to have a look at copies down the front here. They are $50 each, and initially with the brochures that they're postage free. So if anybody would like to have a look at them, I'm not too sure. Is there another official launch of this book? Not yet. No. Okay. Well, tonight's it. So sometimes it works out that way because in the past I've been asked to launch quite a number of family history books, probably at least a dozen of them, and about a quarter of them hadn't been printed yet when they had the family reunion. So it's not the first time that's happened. So look, you're welcome to have a look at that. Oh, strike, I don't think I'm official enough to launch this book. You better get the... You want Lois up here too? Ivan, you better come back. They want to see the book.
Could I just add one little thing? Thanks. In fairness, someone who has not been mentioned this evening, he's given credit in the book, Pastor Jeff Noller, in connection with the archives, he did the initial transcriptions and translations. So I didn't start from scratch. I had that before me. I'd rather dig potatoes too, and that sometimes had some good wording that I could use. And whatever Jeff couldn't work out, then I would have the next go. And if I couldn't work it out, Lois practically infallibly got it. So great credit to Lois.
This is an amazing project, and what did it take? 5 years? Might be more. So he was very committed to this project, particularly if Pastor Schürmann was an ancestor of his, and to come up with this publication. So I recommend it to you, and there'll be more information about it, I'm sure, in the next FoLA newsletter as well. and we'll have copies available here. The other thing perhaps I could mention tonight, and I know it's getting on a bit, at our March meeting, we had our annual meeting and elected our committee, and then it's up to the committee to elect office bearers within that committee, and that meeting was only held last week, and all people were returned to their positions that they had previously, which means you have to put up with me for another year. So look, we thank all those committee members for their commitment, and we're not getting really young anymore, and there's 3 of the ladies turning 80 within the next couple of weeks. Days. Well, very soon. And, you know, I'm the second youngest in the committee, and I'm not really young. So, look, thank you all for coming tonight. I hope you enjoyed it, and those people who came here, particularly as a History Month project, that you got something out of it as well. And you're all most welcome to join us for supper over in the church hall just across the passageway here. So thank you all for coming tonight, and safe trip home. And we look forward to seeing people again, is it 26th of June, when Philip Mann, who's here tonight, will be talking about Daniel Schlinke. And we've heard, some of us have heard a bit about him in recent times, and last week there was a bit of a seminar up at Tanunda where we had a look at some of the sites that relative to him, and then some of his family moved to the United States, to California, and he'll probably speak about that as well. So it's sort of a broad horizon of activities, and last week at Tanunda, the Tanunda Museum, which I'm also a member of, was presented with a copy of the original naturalisation certificate of Daniel Schlinke that was found in a box full of stuff in England, and was brought back here to Adelaide and sorted through. Lo and behold, that was in there, and we don't know how it got there. So Philip will tell you more about that as well. So it's amazing what discoveries we can still make of things that happened a long time ago. So thank you, and I declare the meeting closed, and you're most welcome to join for supper. And if you've got any other personal questions, speak to Greg. If anybody hasn't signed the visitors book, either visitors or members, please do so as well, and pick up some brochures that are on the front counter. Thank you.